You think you know the sound of a heart breaking. It's not a sob, not a scream. It's the silence that follows a truth so devastating it sucks all the air out of the room. I heard that silence, my friends. I crafted it. I sat in my favorite leather chair, the one my children always said I loved more than them, and I watched their worlds shatter. And the terrible, shameful truth, I felt a grim, cold satisfaction. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Daniel, though my grandchildren call me Grandfather Danny. For 47 years, I built an empire, not of bricks and mortar, but of stocks, bonds, and sprawling, silent companies that generated wealth while I slept. My family, my second family, they saw that wealth as a mountain they were destined to inherit. They orbited me like moons around a dying star, waiting for the light to go out so they could claim their prize. It was a Tuesday, I remember. The sky was the color of polished lead. We were gathered in my lawyer's office, a room that smelled of old money and lemon polish. My son Thomas was already packing, his expensive shoes silent on the thick Persian rug. "How long does this have to take, Dad?" he asked, his voice a tight coil of impatience. "I have a merger closing in 2 hours." My daughter Eleanor sat primly, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes were calculating the value of the mahogany desk. "Now, Thomas, be patient. I'm sure Father has been more than fair." She offered me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Haven't you, Dad?" I just nodded, my hands resting on the carved lion heads of my cane. I felt a tremor in my right hand, a betraying shake that I willed to stillness. This was my final performance. My lawyer, Arthur Finch, a man whose face was as unreadable as the legal documents he championed, cleared his throat. "If everyone is ready," he adjusted his spectacles, the thick parchment of my will crinkling as he unfolded it. The sound was like a starting pistol. The first part was standard: bequests to loyal staff, donations to my charities. A collective, barely restrained sigh of boredom filled the room. They were waiting for the main event. Then Arthur's voice, dry and precise, changed ever so slightly. It took on a note of caution. "And now to the disbursement of my entire estate, including all holdings in Daney Holdings International, the primary residence at Seven Oaks, the summer estate in the Hamptons, all stock portfolios and liquid assets." I saw Thomas lean forward, a predator catching a scent. Eleanor's posture became impossibly straighter. "I, Daniel Alastair Hawthorne, being of sound mind and body, hereby bequeath the entirety of my worldly possessions and assets, in perpetuity." I closed my eyes for a second. I could smell her perfume then, just a ghost of it in the air. Lily of the valley, Clara's perfume. Arthur's next words fell into the room like stones into a still pond. "To my sole surviving heir and grandson, Liam James Hawthorne." The silence was immediate, absolute. It was the silence I had paid for with a lifetime of grief. Then the room erupted. "What?" Thomas's roar was pure, undiluted fury. He was on his feet, his face a mottled red. Liam, that's impossible. What the hell is this, Father? Some kind of sick joke?" Eleanor was colder, sharper. Her voice was a shard of ice. "Who is Liam James Hawthorne, Father? Is this some bastard you've hidden away, a child from an affair?" The word bastard was dripped with such venomous contempt that I flinched inwardly. If only it were that simple, if only the truth were that clean. Arthur Finch held up a hand, his authority a thin shield against their rage. "The will is legal and binding. It has been witnessed and notarized. The beneficiary's identity has been verified." "Verified by whom?" Thomas spat, slamming his hand on the desk. The inkwell rattled. "I am your son, your firstborn, this Liam, he gets everything. What about my children? What about your real grandchildren?" That word, real, it was a knife, twisted in a wound that had never healed. I felt my own anger then, a cold, ancient thing, rising in my chest. I opened my eyes and looked at my son, really looked at him. The greed had carved lines around his mouth that I'd never noticed before. "He is real, Thomas," I said, my voice low but cutting through the chaos. More real than you could possibly imagine. It was Alina who found the chink in the armor, the detail everyone else had missed in their blind rage. Her mind, always so sharp, so analytical, latched onto it. Her face went pale, the blood draining away until she was as white as the parchment in Arthur's hands. "Soul's surviving heir," she whispered. Then her eyes, wide with a dawning, horrific understanding, met mine. "Surviving what? Surviving who, Father?" I held her gaze, and in that moment, I let the mask I had worn for 45 years slip. I let her see the depth of the ocean of sorrow I swam in every day. I let her see the ghost that stood between us, between me and any real love I might have given them. "The car accident wasn't an accident," Arthur Finch stated, his voice funereal. "It was a deliberate act of arson, targeting your father's first family 45 years ago. A business rival he had bankrupted sought the ultimate revenge. His first wife, Clara, and their 2 children, James and little Alara, were murdered." The air left the room. Thomas staggered back as if physically struck. Alina's hand flew to her mouth. "I was supposed to be in that car," I continued, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. "I was running late at the office, building my empire." I said the word with all the bitterness it deserved. "They died because of my ambition. They died and I lived. I lived and I rebuilt. I married your mother. I had you too. I provided a life for you that was gilded in every conceivable way." I looked from Thomas's shocked face to Alina's horrified one. "But you were never them. You could never be them. Your mother was a good woman, a kind woman, but she was a sanctuary, not a love. And you were the echoes in an empty house. I tried. God knows I tried to love you as I loved them, but you were always just placeholders, shadows standing in for the sun." The cruelty of it hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I had never spoken these truths aloud, not even to myself in the darkest hours of the night. To say them now was both a confession and a condemnation. Thomas found his voice first, a broken, rasping thing. "All my life, my achievements, my work in your company, it was all for nothing. I was just a stand-in for a ghost." "Your entire life's work," Alina added, her voice trembling with a terrible, cold clarity. "The companies, the houses, the art. It wasn't for us. It wasn't even for you, was it? It was a monument, a tombstone for the family you lost." I nodded slowly, the weight of that truth finally fully acknowledged. Every brick, every dollar, it was all for them, to honor their memory, to build something so vast, so permanent, that the world would never forget that Clara, James, and Alara Hawthorne had once lived and breathed and been loved. "And this Liam," Thomas snarled, the grief in his eyes now submerged by a fresh wave of fury. "Who is he? The son of this saintly James, the grandson you've been secretly grooming while you let me dance like a puppet for 45 years. Arthur Finch intervened again, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Liam James Hawthorne is the legal son of James Daniel Hawthorne, your father's firstborn. He was adopted at birth by James and his wife, Maya, just months before their deaths. His existence was a closely guarded secret, known only to your father and myself, for his protection." "Adopted," Alina whispered, the word tasting foreign. "So he's not even a blood relation." And that was the moment I had been waiting for, the final, devastating twist of the knife. I looked at my children, these strangers I had raised, and I delivered the line I had rehearsed for this very day. "He has more of my blood in his heart than you ever had in your veins," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, yet it carried across the room with the force of a gale. "You see, the fire that took my first family, it didn't just take them. It took a part of me too, the part that knew how to love, the part that could trust, the part that saw you as anything other than a poor, pale imitation of the children I had buried." I saw the words land, saw the complete and utter destruction of their reality in their eyes. They had spent their lives viewing themselves as princes and princesses of a kingdom. Now they saw the truth. They were merely caretakers in a museum dedicated to a tragedy they never knew. Thomas let out a sound that was half groan, half roar. He turned and kicked a small, delicate side table, sending a priceless Chinese vase crashing to the floor. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, a perfect, chaotic mirror of their shattered expectations. "You vengeful old man," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You led us on, you let us believe. All those years I worked for you, I honored you, and it was all a lie, a goddamn lie." Alina didn't move. She just stared at me, her eyes hollow. The calculation was gone, replaced by a void. "You used us," she said, her voice flat dead. "You used Mother. You used our lives to build a shrine. We were never your family. We were your staff." Arthur Finch gestured to two large men by the door who had stepped forward at Thomas's outburst. "I think it's time for you to leave," he said with quiet firmness. "The details of the estate's transfer are complete. Any further communication can be directed through this office." Thomas was breathing in ragged gulps, his fists clenched. He looked at me, and I saw not just anger but a profound, soul-crushing hurt. "I hate you," he choked out. "I hope you rot in hell with your perfect, dead family." He stormed out, followed by the shell-shocked Alina, who paused at the door. She didn't look back at me. She just said to the empty air, "All those times I held your hand when you were sick, all the birthdays, the Christmases, was any of it real? Or were you just going through the motions with a ghost sitting in my chair?" Then she was gone. The silence they left behind was heavier than the shouting. Arthur busied himself with the papers, giving me a moment. I felt a profound exhaustion settle into my bones, a weariness that was 45 years in the making. I had done it. I had executed my final, terrible will. I had ensured my monument would stand. And I had destroyed the two people who, despite everything, had called me father. I felt a single, hot tear trace a path through the wrinkles on my cheek. It wasn't for Thomas or Alina. It wasn't even for me. It was for Clara. It was for James, who loved baseball. It was for Alara, who had her mother's laugh. Arthur finally spoke, his voice gentle. "Daniel, was it worth it?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't know. I had carried my grief for so long it had become a part of me, a second skeleton. Now I had externalized it, made it the law of the land, the inheritor of my kingdom. And I felt empty. I looked around the opulent office, at the symbols of a life spent building walls against the past. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that the vengeance I had just wrought upon my children was only the beginning of the storm. Arthur's question hung in the air between us, a simple inquiry that held the weight of a lifetime. Was it worth it? The lemon polish scent in the room was suddenly suffocating, mixed with the faint, acrid smell of Thomas's rage and the shattered porcelain on the floor. I looked at the broken pieces of the vase, a blue and white landscape now irreparably fractured. It was a fitting image. I didn't answer him. How could I? The cost was still being tallied in the echoing silence of the hallway where my children had just departed, their footsteps fading away like the last echoes of a life I was now permanently closing the door on. I felt 100 years old, every one of my 78 years a stone laid upon my chest. "They'll fight it, Daniel," Arthur said, his voice dropping into the pragmatic, worried tone he used for legal complications. He began gathering the papers, the rustle of the will sounding impossibly loud. "They'll allege undue influence, lack of capacity. They'll dig. They'll hire private investigators to tear this Liam apart, to find any flaw, any chink in the armor." I finally found my voice, though it was rough, graveled with emotion. "Let them try. The foundation is solid, Arthur. You made sure of that. The medical evaluations, the psych assessments, every I dotted, every T crossed. It's ironclad. No legal document is ever truly ironclad against a heart full of hate and a pocket full of money," he replied, his eyes weary behind his spectacles. "You've just declared war on your own children. War is messy and expensive." "It was always a war, Arthur. I said, pushing myself up from the chair, my knees protesting. The lionhead cane felt solid, a grounding force. A cold war fought in silence over dinner tables and birthday parties. Today I just fired the first shot, the only shot that mattered. I walked towards the door, my steps slow and deliberate. Each one felt like a mile. I paused at the threshold, not looking back. Set up the meeting with Liam. Tomorrow, at the property. Arthur's intake of breath was sharp. Daniel, are you sure? So soon? The will hasn't even been filed with the probate court. The dust hasn't settled. The dust will never settle, I said, finally turning to face him. I saw the concern in his eyes, the decades of friendship that had borne the burden of my secret. I need him to see it. I need him to understand what it is, what it all means before the vultures descend. I owe him that. I owe them that. I didn't wait for his reply. I walked out of the office, through the plush reception area and into the elevator. The descent felt like falling. When the doors slid open to the marble lobby, I half expected to see Thomas and Alina waiting, their faces twisted in fresh accusation. But the lobby was empty, save for a security guard who nodded politely. My driver, Henry, stood by the town car, his face a mask of professional neutrality. He'd been with me for 20 years. He had to have heard the shouting, but he simply opened the door. "Home, sir?" he asked, as he always did. I almost said yes. The word was on my lips, but the thought of returning to that vast, silent mausoleum on Fifth Avenue, a house filled with objects my second family had chosen, a house that had never once felt like a home, made my skin crawl. "No, Henry," I said, sliding into the cool leather interior. "Take me to the warehouse, the one in Red Hook." A slight hesitation, the only sign of his surprise. "Of course, sir." As the car pulled into the sluggish New York traffic, I leaned my head back and closed my eyes. But I didn't see darkness. I saw fire. The memory came, unbidden and sharp as it always did. The phone call. The frantic, terrified voice of my housekeeper, Maria. "Mr. Hawthorne, the house, it's on fire. They're inside. Clara and the children." I had been in my office, reviewing a takeover proposal. One moment I was a king at the peak of his power. The next I was a man drowning on dry land. I remembered the drive home, a blur of screaming sirens and my own ragged breathing. The smell of smoke that filled the car long before we reached my street. The orange glow against the night sky, a hellish dawn. And then the scene, the chaos. The firemen holding me back as I tried to run into the inferno, screaming their names until my voice was raw. Clara, James, Ilara, the heat blistering my skin from 50 feet away. The sound of timbers groaning and collapsing. And the terrible, final silence when the flames finally died down, leaving nothing but a smoldering skeleton of a home and of me. I had built that house for Clara. She loved the light, so I'd filled it with windows. She loved to garden, so I'd bought the adjacent lot for her. The fire consumed it all. It consumed them. All that was left was a single, small porcelain hairbrush, monogrammed with an E for Ilara, found miraculously unscathed in the ashes. I kept it in my pocket every day for a year, until the edges were worn smooth from my touch. The official report called it an electrical fire, faulty wiring, an act of God, but I knew. Michael Rostova, the man whose company I had systematically dismantled and driven into bankruptcy, had been there that night. A witness saw his car. He had screamed threats at me in a restaurant a week prior. "I'll burn your world down, Hawthorne. I'll take everything from you like you took from me." The police found it circumstantial. There was no physical proof. Rostova had an alibi, a paid-for alibi, I was sure. He walked away a free man while I was sentenced to a life in the ashes, a life of quiet, screaming vengeance. The car slowed to a stop, pulling me from the past. We were in Red Hook, Brooklyn, in front of a nondescript, brick-walled warehouse that looked like 1,000 others. But this one was different. This one was the heart of my empire, the true seat of my power, and my grief. "Shall I wait, sir?" Henry asked. "Yes," I said, my hand on the door handle. "This won't take long." I used my key and stepped inside, the heavy door closing behind me with a definitive thud. For a moment, I stood in the darkness, listening to the hum of the climate control system. Then I flipped the switches. Light flooded the space, not from harsh industrial lamps, but from soft, recessed lighting that illuminated not stock or machinery, but a home. The home. My first home. I had rebuilt it. Not on the original lot, I couldn't bear that. I'd sold that cursed land. But here, in this secret, temperature-controlled warehouse, I had recreated every single detail of the house that had burned down. Using the original blueprints, using photographs, using the fractured, pain-stained memories of a grieving husband and father, I had commissioned the finest craftsmen to rebuild it, board by board, nail by nail. The Persian rug in the living room, a perfect replica. The wallpaper in the dining room with its tiny, faded roses that Clara had loved. The rocking chair by the fireplace where I used to read to James. The little step stool in the kitchen Alara used to reach the counter and help her mother bake cookies. Their clothes hung in the closets. Their books were on the shelves. James's model airplanes suspended from the ceiling of his bedroom. Alara's collection of porcelain dolls seated in a neat row on her bed. It was a monument. It was a tomb. It was a sanctuary. It was my madness given physical form. I walked through the silent rooms, my cane tapping softly on the hardwood floors. I could almost hear their laughter, their voices. The ghost of Clara's perfume, Lily of the Valley, seemed to linger here, though I knew it was my imagination. I had spent millions on this place. It was the single greatest secret of my life. Arthur knew. The craftsmen sworn to secrecy knew. No one else. Not my second wife, Beatrice, not Thomas, not Alina. This was not for them. This was for them, for Clara, James, and Alara. And now it was for Liam. I walked into James's room. On the desk was a photograph of him and his wife, Maya. They were smiling, so young, so full of hope. They had struggled with infertility for years before finally deciding to adopt. They had been over the moon when they were matched with a baby boy. They named him Liam James, combining his new name with the father he would never know. They had only had him for 3 months when the fire took them. The nanny, a young woman named Sarah, had taken Liam to a routine doctor's appointment that fateful day. It was the only reason he survived. The only reason my bloodline, through the son of my son, endured. Rostova's revenge had failed in one tiny, miraculous way. I had found Sarah through a private investigator a year after the fire. She was terrified, convinced I would blame her for not being there to save the others. But I didn't. I fell to my knees and wept, thanking her for saving this one precious piece of my soul. I set up a trust fund for her, a fortune that allowed her to live a life of comfort. And I took Liam. Not physically. I couldn't raise him. I was a ghost myself, a hollowed-out man capable of building monuments but not of giving love. The sight of him, a baby with James's eyes, would have shattered what little was left of me. So I did the next best thing. I placed him with a distant cousin of Clara's, a kind, childless couple living in quiet anonymity in Vermont. I provided everything. The best schools, the best opportunities, all from the shadows. I became his anonymous benefactor, his guardian angel, as his adoptive parents called me. I watched him grow up through reports and photographs. I saw James's smile in his graduation photos. I saw Clara's thoughtful intelligence in his academic achievements. And I waited. I built my financial empire not for glory, but to create an unassailable fortress of wealth for this boy, this living testament to the family I had lost. My second family, Thomas and Alina, were merely stewards. They were the public face of the Hawthorne legacy, running the companies, living in the mansions, all the while unaware that they were merely temporary caretakers for a king in waiting. I sat on the edge of James's perfectly made bed, the bed he had never slept in as a man, and I wept. Silent, heaving sobs that tore from a place deep inside me I thought had turned to stone. I cried for the children I had lost. I cried for the children I had betrayed today. I cried for the grandson who had never known his grandfather's touch. And I cried for myself, for the man who had chosen a legacy of stone and memory over a legacy of flesh and blood. The tears were a storm, and when they passed, I felt raw, scraped clean. But the resolve remained. It was hardened, tempered in the fire of my grief. I stood up, straightened my tie, and walked out of the ghost house, locking the door behind me. The future was waiting. The next morning, the storm broke. My phone began ringing before dawn. First, it was Thomas. "You unbelievable bastard," he hissed, his voice crackling with a sleepless, venomous energy. "You have a secret love nest, a replica of your real family's house. What is wrong with you? Are you insane?" So they had hired investigators, and good ones. They had found the warehouse. Of course they had. I had made no extreme efforts to hide the property taxes. It was just one of hundreds of holdings in a labyrinthine corporate structure. But hate is a powerful motivator. "It is a memorial, Thomas," I said, my voice calm. I was standing in the kitchen of my Fifth Avenue home, watching the sun rise over Central Park. The city was waking up, oblivious to the private drama unfolding in one of its golden towers. "A memorial," he laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "It's a shrine to your psychosis. My God, the investigators report it's all there. The furniture, the toys, the clothes. You kept their clothes, you sick, twisted old man. No judge will uphold a will written by a man who's been playing dollhouse with his dead family for 40 years. The will has been upheld by 3 separate psychiatric evaluations conducted over the past 5 years, I replied, sipping my black coffee. It tasted like ash. My mental competency is not in question. My motives, however, are my own. "Your motives," he screamed, and I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Your motive is to spit on my mother's grave, to spit on Alina and me. We loved you, we were there. Those ghosts were never there for you. They're dead. They're gone." "They are more present to me than you have ever been," I said, and the truth of it was a cold, hard stone in my gut. He hung up on me. The dial tone buzzed in my ear like an angry insect. Next was Alina. Her approach was different. It was always different. "Father," she began, her voice syrupy with false concern. "I'm so worried about you. Thomas told me about that place. It sounds unhealthy. It sounds like you've been living in a state of delusion for decades. We want to help you. We can get you the best care. We can make this all go away. You can rescind the will, check into a facility for a little rest, and we can handle everything. We're your family. We love you." The manipulation was so transparent, so practiced. I felt a pang of something, pity, perhaps, for the woman she had become. The little girl who used to sit on my lap and beg for stories had been replaced by this cold, strategic operator. "There is no delusion, Alina," I said, my tone softer than it had been with Thomas. "There is only a truth you never knew, and there will be no rescinding of the will. The meeting with Liam is today." The silence on her end was deafening. I could practically hear the gears in her brain grinding, recalculating. The boy," she finally said, her voice losing its sugary tone, becoming brittle. "You're meeting him, after all this time. What are you going to do? Introduce him to the dollhouse?" "I am going to introduce him to his inheritance," I said, "and to his family." "We are his family," she shrieked, the mask finally slipping entirely. "We are the Hawthorns. He is nothing. A cuckoo you're trying to drop in our nest. He will never be one of us. Never." "He," I said quietly, "is the only one of us that matters." I ended the call and turned off my phone. The silence was a blessing. Henry was due in an hour to drive me to the meeting point, a neutral location, a small, quiet park near the warehouse. I wasn't ready to show him the monument yet. First, I had to meet the boy, the man. My hands would not stop shaking. I saw him before he saw me. He was sitting on a park bench under the dappled shade of an old oak tree. He was looking out at the pond where ducks glided serenely. He was tall, like James. He had James's build, the same way of holding himself, a quiet confidence that wasn't arrogant, just assured. But when he turned his head slightly, I saw Clara. I saw the same gentle curve of her jaw, the the same intelligent light in his eyes. My breath caught in my throat. It was like seeing two ghosts fused into one living, breathing person. The pain was so acute, so beautiful, it was almost unbearable. I walked towards him, my cane sinking into the soft grass. He heard my approach and stood up, turning to face me fully. He was handsome, with a kind, open face. He looked nervous but not afraid, curious. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said, his voice a pleasant, steady baritone. No trace of the New York accent that clung to Thomas and Alina. He had been raised in Vermont, after all. "Liam," I said, and my voice cracked on the single syllable. I cleared my throat, extending a hand. "Please, call me Daniel." His handshake was firm, warm, real. It's an honor to finally meet you, sir. Arthur Finch has told me so much. Well, he's told me a lot about the legal and financial arrangements, not so much about you." I managed a small, tight smile. There isn't much to tell that the balance sheets haven't already revealed. I gestured to the bench. "Shall we?" We sat. An awkward silence descended. "What did you say to the grandson you've kept a secret for his entire life? What did you say to the living embodiment of your greatest loss and your only hope?" "I want to thank you," Liam began, breaking the silence, "for everything. The education, the opportunities, my parents, they never had to worry because of you. They told me about our guardian angel. I always pictured someone I don't know older." He gave a slight, self-deprecating smile. "I am plenty old," I said, a real smile touching my lips for the first time in what felt like years. "And you do not need to thank me. It was my responsibility and my privilege." I looked at him, really looked at him. He had none of Thomas's restless avarice, none of Alina's calculating coolness. He seemed grounded, normal. "You must have questions," I said. "A few," he admitted, his smile fading into a more serious expression. "The main one is why? Why me? Why all of this? Arthur told me about the will, about everything going to me. I don't understand. You have children, grandchildren. I've seen their pictures in the papers. Thomas and Alina Hawthorne, they run your companies." "They manage my companies," I corrected him gently. "There is a difference." I took a deep breath, the scent of grass and water filling my lungs. "The reason is simple, Liam, though the story is not. You are the son of my son, James, my firstborn." His eyes widened. He had been told he was adopted, but his adoptive parents had known very little about his biological father's family, only that they had died tragically and that a trust was in place. "Your father," I continued, my gaze drifting to the pond, seeing not ducks but flames, "was the greatest man I ever knew, and I only knew him for 7 years. I told him then. I told him about Clara, whose laughter could light up a room. I told him about James, who wanted to be a fireman and then an astronaut. I told him about Alara, who loved butterflies and could name every species in the garden. I told him about the life we had, a life of simple, profound joy that I, in my foolish ambition, had taken for granted. And then I told him about the fire. I told him about Rostova. I told him about the hatred that had consumed a man and in turn had consumed my family. I spoke of the ashes, the silence, the unending grief. I did not cry this time. The tears had been spent. Now there was only the stark, brutal narrative. Liam listened, utterly still, his eyes never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt. He didn't gasp or react with dramatic horror. He just absorbed it, his expression a shifting canvas of sadness, empathy, and a dawning, grim understanding. When I finished, the story laid bare between us on that sunny park bench. He was silent for a long time. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. "So all of it, the money, the businesses, it was for them," he said softly. "It was for their memory," I said. "And it is for you. You are their legacy, Liam. You are the proof that Rostova failed, that the hate didn't win. You are the future I built from the ashes of my past." He absorbed this, the weight of it visibly settling on his young shoulders. It was a weight I had carried for 45 years. Now I was passing it to him. "And Thomas, Alina," he asked, Where do they fit in? I sighed a long, weary exhalation. They were a life I tried to live after the one I wanted ended. Their mother was a good woman. I cared for her, but I was never truly present. I was a ghost in my own home. I provided for them materially, but I withheld the one thing that mattered, my heart. It had been buried with Clara and the children. What I did yesterday, disinheriting them, it was the final, cruel act of a man who has always been only half alive. They see it as a betrayal. And perhaps it is, but it was the only truth I had left to give. Liam looked troubled. They must hate me. They hate the idea of you, I said. They do not know you, and after today their hate will only grow. They will contest the will. They will attack your character. They will try to destroy you legally and personally. You must be ready. I saw a flicker of steel in his eyes then. It was James's steel, the same quiet determination his father had when facing a challenge. I understand, he said, his voice firm. What would you have me do? I looked at him, this young man who was both a stranger and the most familiar person in the world to me. First, I said, standing up, I would like to show you something. I would like to show you your home. The drive to the warehouse was short and silent. Liam looked out the window, processing the incredible story he'd just been told. When we pulled up to the anonymous brick building, he looked confused. This is it? He asked. This is it, I said. I unlocked the door and led him inside. I left him standing in the darkness for a moment, then I flipped the switch. The light bloomed, illuminating the living room of the house. The perfect replica. The Persian rug, the rose-patterned wallpaper, the rocking chair. Liam took a single step forward, then stopped. His breath hitched. He looked around, his eyes wide with a confusion that slowly melted into a profound, awestruck horror. He saw the model airplanes. He saw the dolls on the bed down the hall. He walked, as if in a trance, into the kitchen, his fingers trailing over the countertop, over the little step stool. He turned to me, his face pale. What is this place? This is the house your father grew up in, I said, my voice echoing in the vast, silent space. This is where he lived, where he laughed, where he was loved. It is exactly as it was on the day he died. Liam walked slowly through the rooms, touching things with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. He paused in front of a photograph on the mantelpiece, James and Clara on their wedding day. He picked it up, his hand trembling. You built this, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You built all of this. I had to, I said simply. I couldn't let them disappear. I couldn't let the world forget. He turned to face me and I saw tears in his eyes, but they weren't tears of joy or gratitude. They were tears of pity and sadness. Grandfather, he said, and the word, the first time he had ever spoken it, struck me with the force of a physical blow. This isn't a home. It's a museum. It's a beautiful, terrible prison. He gestured around the perfectly still, perfectly silent space. They're not here. Building this, keeping their clothes, their toys, it's not keeping them alive. It's keeping you trapped, in the past, in the fire. His words were like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. They didn't make me angry. They just made me tired. So very, very tired. It is all I have, I said, the defense sounding weak even to my own ears. No, Liam said, taking a step towards me. He looked at me not with the greed of Thomas or the manipulation of a leaner, but with a startling, clear-eyed compassion. You have me. I'm here. I'm real. We can't live in this ghost house. We have to live in the world. Their legacy isn't this perfect replica. It's the life I get to live because they existed. It's the future. I looked at him, this boy who saw through my 45-year project with the unerring clarity of youth. He was right. I knew he was right. But letting go of this monument felt like letting go of them a second time. It felt like a final, ultimate betrayal. Before I could respond, my private line, the one only Arthur and Henry had, buzzed in my pocket. I answered it, my eyes still locked with Liam. It was Henry, his voice urgent, strained. Sir, you need to turn on the news, any channel now. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I walked to a small control panel on the wall and turned on the television that was discreetly mounted there. The screen flickered to life. It was a news conference. Thomas and Alina were standing side by side at a podium draped with the logo of their flagship company, Hawthorne Enterprises. Their faces were masks of somber concern. Microphones were clustered in front of them. "Deeply concerned for our father's mental well-being," Alina was saying, her voice dripping with faux sadness. "Recent events have revealed a long-standing and profound detachment from reality. We believe he is suffering from a complex grief disorder that has rendered him incapable of managing his own affairs, let alone making sound decisions about the future of our family's legacy." Thomas stepped forward, his jaw set. "We have filed a petition in New York Surrogate's Court to have Daniel Hawthorne declared mentally incompetent. We have compelling evidence of his irrational behavior, including the construction of a replica home dedicated to a family that passed away decades ago. We are his family. We are here, and we will fight to protect him from himself and from those who would seek to exploit his fragile state." The reporters erupted with questions. Is it true the entire estate has been left to an unknown heir? Who is Liam Hawthorne? Thomas held up a hand for silence. "We cannot comment on the specifics of the legal case, but we can say this. We will not allow our father's life's work to be stolen by a stranger based on the delusions of a broken, grieving man. We will expose this for what it is, a cruel fraud perpetrated on a vulnerable elder." I stood there, frozen, watching my children sell our family's shame to the world on live television. They were painting me as a doddering fool and Liam as a predatory opportunist. The war Arthur had warned me about had just gone nuclear. Liam was watching the screen, his face a grim mask. He looked from the televised images of his aunt and uncle back to me, to the ghost house around us. "So," he said, his voice quiet but firm, devoid of panic, "this is it. This is the fight." I turned off the television. The silence in the warehouse was heavier than ever, now charged with the electricity of the coming battle. I looked at my grandson. I saw no fear in his eyes, only resolve. The same resolve I had carried for 45 years, but his was not fueled by grief and vengeance. It seemed to be fueled by something else, something cleaner, something like justice. He looked at me and he nodded, a single, decisive dip of his chin. The ghosts of the past had been acknowledged. The battles of the present had been declared. And in that moment, I knew with a certainty that shook me to my core, that the carefully laid plans of a lifetime were about to be tested in a fire far more dangerous than the one that started it all. The silence in the wake of the television's glow was more deafening than any explosion. The images of Thomas and Alina, their faces etched with performative concern and venomous betrayal, seemed burned onto the inside of my eyelids. I could feel the narrative hardening in the public mind already. The tragic, senile old billionaire and the conniving, unknown heir. They were rewriting my reality, and they were doing it with the ruthless efficiency I had taught them. Liam was the first to speak. His voice was calm, but there was a new tension in his shoulders, a readiness that hadn't been there minutes before. "They're not just contesting the will," he said, his gaze fixed on the dark screen. "They're erasing you. They're making you out to be a lunatic so that nothing you say or have ever said will hold weight." I turned from the television to look at him, standing in the center of this ghost house. His words from moments before echoed in my mind. This isn't a home, it's a prison. And now my own children were using my prison as the primary evidence for my insanity. The irony was so perfect, so brutal, it was almost artistic. "They are using my grief as a weapon," I said, the words tasting like gall. "A grief they never understood because I never allowed them to." "What do we do?" Liam asked. There was no panic in his question. It was tactical. He was already shifting from the grandson hearing a family history to the heir assessing a threat. "We fight," I said, the old fire of 1,000 boardroom battles flickering to life in my gut. But this was different. This was personal. This was for Clara, for James, for Ilara, and now inexplicably for this young man who saw my monument for the cage it was. But we fight smart. They have the spotlight, they have the sympathy, we have the truth, and we have this. I gestured around the warehouse. Their evidence of my instability is also my evidence of a lifelong, consistent purpose, a purpose that predates their very existence. Arthur will know how to use it. My phone, the private one, buzzed again. It was Arthur, his voice was grim. I assume you've seen. I've seen, I replied, my voice steady now, the shock giving way to a cold, focused rage. They've filed a mountain of paperwork. Affidavits from friends who say you've been distant for years, from a housekeeper who says you talk to empty chairs. They've got a forensic accountant ready to pick apart the trust funds for Liam, to paint it as financial manipulation of a vulnerable person. They're throwing everything at the wall. Let them, I said, my eyes meeting Liam's. Schedule a press conference for tomorrow. 10 a.m. We'll hold it here. A beat of stunned silence from Arthur. Here, Daniel, are you mad? That's exactly what they want. They want to parade this place as proof of your diminished capacity. They want to control the narrative, Arthur, I countered. So we will take it from them, we will show them the monument. We will tell them the story. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. The fire, Rostova, the loss, all of it. It's a huge risk, Arthur warned. The public, they might just see a crazy old man living in a museum. Or, I said, a plan crystallizing with terrifying clarity. They might see a man who loved his family so deeply, he spent his entire life ensuring they were never forgotten. They might see a villain, Arthur, or they might see a tragic hero, but they will not see a fool, and they will see Liam. They will see his face, and they will see that he is not a predator. He is a promise. I ended the call before he could protest further. I turned to Liam. This will put you in the crosshairs. Every detail of your life will be scrutinized. Your adoptive parents will be harassed. There will be no going back to anonymity. Liam took a deep breath, looking once more around the perfect, silent rooms. He walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the wedding photo of James and Clara. He traced the glass over his father's face. They've been a part of me my whole life, and I never knew, he said softly. This secret, it was a weight on you, but it was an emptiness in me. I'm not going back. I'm going forward. He set the photo down and turned to me, his expression resolute. What do you need me to do? For the next 24 hours, the world outside this warehouse was a frenzy. The news channels were feasting on the story. Billionaire, bizarre bequest. Family feud or elder exploitation. Legal pundits debated the merits of the competency case. TMZ-style outlets dug into what they could find on Liam James, which was very little, making him seem even more suspicious. Through it all, Arthur and I worked. We assembled our own evidence. The 3 pristine psychiatric evaluations, the meticulously documented history of the Rostova feud, including the witness statement about his car at the fire, the statement the original police had deemed insufficient. We were building a counter-narrative. I wasn't incompetent. I was a victim, a survivor, and a man of unwavering, if unorthodox, devotion. The next morning at 9:50 a.m., the warehouse was transformed. The quiet sanctuary was now a stage. Bright television lights glared, highlighting the surreal normality of the domestic setting. Reporters, shuffled in by a security team, gaped at their surroundings, their whispers echoing in the vast space. They were seated in rows of chairs set up in the living room, facing a simple podium we had placed near the fireplace. I stood in the reconstructed master bedroom out of sight, watching the crowd gather on a monitor. My heart was a drum in my chest. I felt Clara's hairbrush in my pocket, a smooth, cool talisman. Liam stood beside me. He wore a simple dark suit. He looked pale but determined. "Ready?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but it doesn't matter." At 10 a.m. sharp, Arthur walked to the podium. The room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," he began, his voice amplified and echoing. "You are here today because you have been fed a story. A story about mental decline and exploitation. My client, Daniel Hawthorne, is here to tell you a different story. A true story. One of love, loss, and a legacy that was almost stolen by hatred 45 years ago. He gestured towards me. I give you Daniel Hawthorne. I walked out into the blinding lights. I could feel the collective intake of breath, the stares taking in the bizarre backdrop of a perfectly preserved suburban home inside a Brooklyn warehouse. I saw the skepticism on their faces. I leaned on my cane and began to speak. I did not use notes. I told them everything. I started not with the fire, but with the joy. I described Clara's laugh. I imitated James trying to pitch a baseball. I talked about Alara's fascination with butterflies. I made them see the people, not the ghosts. I made them feel the warmth of the life that was lived in this very room, in its original form. And then I told them about the night it was taken. I described the phone call, the drive, the hellish glow, the heat. I spoke of the ashes. I did not shy away from the pain. I let my voice break when I described identifying what was left of my family. I saw reporters hardened by 1,000 tragedies lower their notebooks, their faces softened by empathy. Then I named Rostova. I detailed his threat. I presented the ignored witness statement. I painted a picture not of a random tragedy, but of a calculated murder. I explained that this warehouse, this recreation, was not the act of a madman, but the act of a historian, a keeper of flames. It was my testimony. It was my proof that they had existed, that they had mattered. My second family, I continued, my voice growing harder. My children, Thomas and Alina, have always known of my loss, but they never knew its depth. They never knew that my heart never left this home. They were raised in luxury, given every opportunity, handed the reins to a multi-billion-dollar empire to manage. But they were merely stewards. The true heir, the legacy of my heart, was always meant for the blood of my firstborn, James. I turned and gestured to the side of the room. And here he is, the son of my son, the living proof that Michael Rostova's hatred failed, my grandson, Liam Hawthorne. Liam walked out and stood beside me. The camera flashes exploded. He didn't flinch. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that was both simple and profound. My grandfather has been called incompetent for loving his family too much, Liam said, his voice clear and confident, carrying through the room without a microphone. He's been called delusional for refusing to let the world forget an act of evil that took his wife and children. I have only known him for a day, but in that day I have seen not a broken man, but the strongest man I have ever met. The will is not the product of a failing mind. It is the final, definitive chapter of a love story that a fire could not destroy. The room was utterly silent. Then a single reporter began to clap, then another. Soon the warehouse was filled with a rolling, hesitant but genuine wave of applause. We had done it. We had stolen the narrative back. But the war was far from over. The press conference changed the public sentiment, but the legal battle raged on for months. Thomas and Alina, backed by their considerable resources, fought every point. They deposed me, trying to trip me up to find a moment of confusion. They hired their own battery of psychiatrists who, for a hefty fee, were willing to testify that my fixated grief rendered me incapable of sound judgment. It was during one of these brutal depositions, led by a shark-like attorney named Ms. Claiborne, that the first crack appeared. Not in my story, but in theirs. She was grilling me about the financial structures of the trusts for Liam, implying I was manipulated by Arthur into setting them up. And you never once questioned Mr. Finch's advice, never once thought to involve your son, Thomas, a seasoned CEO, in these complex financial arrangements for a child you never met. I trusted Arthur implicitly, I said. He was the only one who knew the whole truth. The truth, she sneered. A very convenient truth that conveniently disinherits your present family and funnels billions to a man who, by your own admission, was placed with a family in Vermont, was it? She shuffled through her papers. A Mr. and Mrs. Miller. Yes, I said, a cold finger of unease tracing my spine. Something in her tone was too confident. And you never independently verified the adoption agency, the background of the Millers. You simply took Mr. Finch's word for it and began shoveling money their way. Arthur handled it discreetly. It was necessary for Liam's safety. Safety from whom? She pressed. The long-dead Mr. Ristova, or from the scrutiny of your actual family? It was a standard line of attack, but the way she said Mr. and Mrs. Miller, it stuck with me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed in the Fifth Avenue apartment, the city lights casting long shadows. The name Miller echoed in my mind. It was a common name, too common. A memory buried for decades stirred. A piece of paper on Arthur's desk over 20 years ago. I'd gone to his office unannounced. He'd hurriedly covered a file, but not before I'd seen the name on the tab. Not Miller. It was something else, something similar. Millerson, Milligan. The cold finger became an ice pick. Why would Arthur have a file with a similar name? It was probably nothing, a coincidence. But in my world there were no coincidences. There was only strategy and betrayal. I got out of bed. I didn't call Arthur. I didn't call my usual investigators. The paranoia that Thomas and Alina had accused me of was now, finally, taking root. If there was a secret here, I couldn't risk alerting anyone. I called Henry. He was waiting outside my apartment, as he often did, in the small chauffeur's lounge. Henry, I said, my voice low. I need a favor, a discreet one. No one can know, not Arthur, no one. Of course, sir, he said, his loyalty absolute. I need you to find everything you can on the adoption of Liam James Hawthorne, the agency in Vermont, the caseworkers, everything. And I need you to look into Arthur Finch, his finances, any anomalies over the past 20 years. Henry's expression didn't change. It will be done, sir. The wait was agony. The court battles continued, a draining slog of motions and counter-motions. Liam proved to be a quick study, immersing himself in the business, his natural intelligence and lack of entitlement winning over key executives who were tired of Thomas's bluster and Alina's manipulation. He was becoming the leader I had always hoped James would be. 2 weeks later, Henry came to me. He didn't have files, he didn't have documents, he had a name and an address. The adoption agency was legitimate, he said quietly, but the caseworker who handled Liam's file retired shortly after. I tracked her down. Florida. She was reluctant to talk, but after I explained the situation, she confirmed that the adoption was handled through a third-party lawyer, not Arthur Finch, a man named Gerald Milligan. Milligan, the name from the file tab. Milligan, I repeated, the word feeling like poison on my tongue. She said it was all very hushed. Large sums of money were involved. She assumed it was a private adoption between wealthy families. She never met the birth parents. Everything was handled by Milligan. In Arthur, I asked, my throat tight. His finances are complex, sir, but there is a pattern. For the last 22 years, approximately $5 million has been funneled from a blind trust you set up for family security into an LLC registered in the Cayman Islands. That LLC makes a single, annual payment to a holding company owned by Gerald Milligan. The room tilted. I had to grip the back of a chair. The blind trust, I had given Arthur sole discretion over it after the fire. It was for emergencies, for security, for protecting what was left of my family. He had been stealing from me, for decades, but why? And what did it have to do with Liam? Where is Gerald Milligan? I asked, my voice a ghost of itself. He has an office in White Plains, Henry said. I have the address. I didn't take a car service. I drove myself, a nondescript sedan Henry had acquired. I sat outside a modest, slightly shabby office building for an hour, gathering my nerve. Then I walked in. Gerald Milligan was a small, balding man with the tired eyes of a lifelong bureaucrat. His office was a testament to mediocre success. When I told him who I was, the color drained from his face. "I think you know why I'm here," I said, not sitting down. "The adoption, Liam Hawthorne, the money from Arthur Finch." He began to stammer, to deny. I cut him off. "I am not here to prosecute you for fraud, Mr. Milligan. Not today. I am here for the truth. You will give it to me, or I will ensure the rest of your life is spent in a cell, reflecting on the wisdom of stealing from Daniel Hawthorne." He broke. He told me everything. It was a story so simple, so devastating, that it unraveled the very fabric of my reality. Arthur Finch had come to him over 2 decades ago. He had a delicate situation. His most important client, me, had suffered a terrible loss. There was a baby, the grandson, who needed to be placed, but the client was unstable, grief-stricken. It needed to be done quietly through an intermediary. And there was a bonus, a very large annual bonus for his discretion. Milligan, facing bankruptcy, had agreed. But there was more, Milligan said, sweating profusely. A year later, Finch came back. He said the client was becoming paranoid, that he, Finch, needed to control the narrative. He gave me a new file, a fabricated history for the boy's biological parents. He said if anyone ever came asking, especially the client himself, I was to provide that file, the one with the names James and Maya Hawthorne. I felt the floor drop out from under me. "Fabricated," I whispered. "Oi, Liam, he wasn't the son of your son, Mr. Hawthorne," Milligan said, his voice trembling with pity and fear. "Arthur Finch found him through a different channel, a young, unwed mother from New Jersey. She was paid a one-time sum to relinquish all rights and disappear. The story about James and Maya adopting him, it was all a lie. A story Arthur crafted to give you a focal point for your grief, a reason to keep going, to keep building your empire with him as your indispensable right hand." I stumbled back, collapsing into a worn leather chair. The air was gone from the room. The entire structure of my life, my purpose, my vengeance, my legacy, was built on a foundation of sand. A lie. Liam was not my blood. He was not James's son. He was a stranger, strategically placed by the man I trusted most. The revenge I had so meticulously planned, the will that disinherited my children, it was all based on a fiction. I had betrayed my living family for a ghost that Arthur had invented. The grief that washed over me was a new kind of fire. It burned away everything. My love for Clara, James, and Alara was real. The fire was real. But the vessel for my hope, the reason for my continued ambition, was a fraud. I drove back to the city in a trance. I went straight to Arthur's office, bypassing his secretary, throwing open his door. He looked up from his desk, startled, then concerned. "Daniel, what is it? What happened?" I didn't speak. I just looked at him. I saw the years in his face, the shared burdens, the secrets, and I saw the calculation, the manipulation. He saw the knowledge in my eyes, and his face fell. The mask of the faithful friend crumbled into weary defeat. "You know," he said softly, "it wasn't a question." "Why, Arthur?" My voice was ragged. "For the money." He gave a sad, hollow laugh. "The money was a pleasant side effect. No, Daniel, it was for you." He stood up, walking to the window. "After the fire, you were gone. You were a shell. You were going to let it all go. Your companies, your wealth, it was going to drift away. You were going to die in that grief. I couldn't let that happen. I had built my life around you, around your empire." He turned to face me. "You needed a reason, a purpose. I gave you one. I gave you Liam, a grandson to build for, a legacy to protect. I created the narrative to give your pain a direction. It worked, Daniel. Look what you built. Look at what you achieved. It was all for him, and in doing so, you saved yourself. You became a titan again." "You lied to me," I said, the words barely audible. "You made me betray my children for a lie." "Your children," he spat, his own anger surfacing. "Those spoiled, greedy vultures, they were never worthy of you. They were never worthy of what you and Clara had. I gave you an heir worthy of that memory. I shaped a boy who could be what James would have been. And he is, you've seen it. He's better than Thomas will ever be." I stared at him, at the monstrous, warped love in his eyes. He had played God with my life. He had taken my genuine, world-ending grief and had channeled it into a productive, profitable fiction. He had given me a marionette to love, and I had poured my entire soul into it. I turned and walked out. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. The final court hearing was the following week. It was to be the judge's ruling on the competency petition. The courtroom was packed. Thomas and Alina were there, confident. Liam was there, sitting with our legal team, looking at me with an expression of unwavering support. He had no idea. He believed he was my grandson. He believed the story as much as I had. I stood before the judge, my body feeling like it belonged to someone else. "Your Honor," I began before any lawyers could speak, "I would like to make a statement." The judge, a stern woman with sharp eyes, nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Hawthorne." I looked at Thomas and Alina. I saw the bitter hope in their eyes. I looked at Liam and my heart broke for the innocent life caught in this web of lies, and I knew what I had to do. Justice was no longer about the past. It was about the future. "The will I drafted," I said, my voice clear and strong, "was written under a fundamental misconception. I was led to believe that my grandson, Liam James Hawthorne, was the biological son of my late son, James. I have recently discovered that this is not the case." A gasp went through the courtroom. Thomas's jaw dropped. Alina's eyes widened in shock. Liam stared at me, confusion and dawning horror on his face. "The will, therefore, based on this false premise, is invalid," I continued, the words feeling like a surrender and a liberation all at once. "I hereby rescind it." The room erupted. Thomas looked triumphant. Alina allowed herself a small, cold smile, but I wasn't finished. "However," I said, silencing the room again, "my assessment of my children's character remains unchanged. Their actions these past months have confirmed their avarice and their profound lack of empathy. They are not fit to be the sole stewards of the legacy I built." I turned to the judge. "Therefore, Your Honor, I am of sound mind, and I hereby issue a new directive. My entire estate will be placed into a charitable foundation dedicated to supporting victims of arson and their families. The foundation will be chaired by Liam James Miller, whose integrity and character I have come to respect deeply, despite the circumstances of our meeting. My children, Thomas and Alina, will receive a single lump sum payment, as stipulated in their mother's trust, which they cannot touch. They will receive nothing more from me." The silence was absolute. I had disinherited everyone. I had given my empire to the world, and I had given the responsibility of overseeing it to the boy who was not my grandson. I looked at Liam. The shock on his face was being replaced by a slow, deep understanding. He wasn't losing an inheritance, he was being given a purpose, a real one, not based on a lie but on his own merit. I looked at Thomas and Alina. Their triumph had turned to ashes. They had gotten what they wanted, the will was overturned, but they had lost everything. They were now merely rich instead of obscenely powerful, and they were exposed. I walked out of the courtroom a free man. The ghosts were finally laid to rest. The monument in the warehouse was just a building now. The revenge was complete, but it was a revenge against the lies, against the manipulation, against the greed that had poisoned my life. Liam found me outside. "The name on the adoption papers, Miller," he said quietly. "It was your mother's name," I said. "It's your name. I'm sorry for the part I played in the lie." He was silent for a long moment. "You didn't know." He looked at me and there were no ghosts in his eyes anymore, just the man he was. "The foundation, it's a good thing, a really good thing. I'll do right by it." "I know you will," I said. And for the first time since the fire, I felt a peace that was not born of vengeance, but of clarity. The forgotten first family was finally truly at rest. And I was, at last, free to live whatever life I had left, not as a keeper of the past, but as a man stepping into an unexpected and finally honest future.